Hi, my name is Jared, and this is Horror Obsession. You know, with the extreme divide in the United States right now, primarily down political lines, I've noticed a disturbing trend coming from both sides. Those of you who are on the younger side may not even remember this, but prior to the internet, everyone would get their news from a newspaper. When the internet came out, most people understandably decided, why pay for a newspaper when I can get the same news online for free? And we save trees that way. Since that time, however, one major problem with getting news from strictly online sources has started to emerge. And that problem is that the news that is reported is no longer vetted to any significant degree. There are some publications and news organizations that still have some journalistic integrity and try to only report facts with reputable sources. However, for the most part, it has become a free-for-all. As a result, one can find anything online which supports their opinion. What many people now consider research is simply Googling some phrase which is basically nothing more than a loaded question, such as, why are D.B. Weiss and David Benioff sentient machines sent back through time to ruin Game of Thrones? Or, why did Russell Crowe transition to a Stay Puft Marshmallow Man? My point is, people look for what they want to find and see what they want to see. In psychology, this is called confirmation bias, or the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of one's existing beliefs or theories, rather than taking new evidence and revising existing opinions. So what does any of this rambling have to do with Robert Eggers' horror masterpiece, The Witch? Well, I was recently watching Eli Roth's fantastic series, History of Horror, which focuses on a different subgenre of horror each episode, and has great interviews with directors and actors providing interesting anecdotes about various films, insights into the production or writing process, and also their interpretation of what the theme and meaning of the films are. For those of you who have not seen The Witch, it is a beautifully shot, masterfully acted, technical wonder of a film which receives my highest possible recommendation. From here on out, there are spoilers, and if you haven't seen it, turn this off and just go watch it. It is far more entertaining than listening to me. So anyway, I was watching the episode about witch movies, and one of the guests on the show provided their interpretation of The Witch, which was that Thomasin, Anya Taylor-Joy's character, preferred the satanic witch cult to the patriarchy of her society, and that decision to do this was the strongest possible indictment of patriarchal culture.
I don't think joining a Satan-worshipping group of witches is seen as necessarily a good thing. But the fact that it's seen as preferable to the patriarchal society that it was in is a much more powerful damnation, I think, of that society.
Look, I am not someone to say you have to have the same interpretation of a piece of art as me, and obviously people view things differently, but I think this view is way off base. I am also not someone to say you have to find the creator's intended theme or meaning, but I do believe that if you are going to provide an interpretation, it needs to be well supported by the evidence of the piece of art itself. And that is where this particular interpretation falls apart for me. Just to remind those of you who have seen this movie, which by now should be all of you, let's quickly run through the story. Anya Taylor-Joy plays a young woman named Thomasin, living in 1630s New England, and her family get kicked out of the safety of their colony due to her father's extreme religious views. Fanatical even for their time, which honestly is kind of impressive since nowadays people use the term puritanical religious views as synonymous with religious extremism. So Anya and her family go start their own farmstead, and one day while Anya is taking care of her baby brother, she is playing peekaboo and the baby disappears in an instant. The family searches but cannot find the boy and presumes a wolf took him. So later, Anya's other younger brother gets seduced by an attractive witch in the forest, who lures him in using her feminine sexuality and then kisses him, poisoning him. He is taken back to the farmstead, extremely sick, and later vomits up an apple. And they use the most cutting-edge medical technology available to them, which is...
Pray.
Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
Hashtag thoughts and prayers. In what is the most obvious plot hole in the movie, he dies despite the old T&P treatment. His death is the last straw for the mother, Catherine, played by Kate Dickie, who has a long history of, unusual relationships with her kids.
Your aunt has done a bad thing, Robin, a very bad thing. You remember her, don't you?
The parents and Anya's conflict reaches a boiling point, and her father gets gored by their black goat. so Catherine breaks and attacks Anya. Anya defends herself and kills her mother, at which point the billy goat, rudely named Black Phillip, reveals himself to be the literal devil, Lucifer. Anya chooses the life of luxury, which I guess at that time basically meant you could get butter every now and then.
What canst thou give?
Wouldst thou like the taste of butter?
Man, do we have it good nowadays. Damn. So anyway, she takes her clothes off and goes to the woods and joins the other witches in their ritualistic sacrifice of children. The end. So what are we supposed to take away from this? I certainly understand where the idea of the theme is patriarchal society comes from. I mean, after all, Anya's father is extremely overbearing, willing to use any means necessary, including violence, to subdue his family to his wishes. However, sometimes it's important to look at a piece of art and see it for what it is. As a genius psychiatrist once said,
read Marcus Aurelius. Of each particular thing, ask, what is it in itself? What is its nature?
what Dr. Lecter is getting at here is removing your personal biases from your perspective and interpretation of something is the only way to see it for what it is. In other words, the only way to see the truth. So what is the truth about the witch? Well, frankly, it's kind of obvious. William gets kicked out of town for being too religious, even at a time of Calvinism, which is sort of like getting kicked out of Canada for liking maple syrup too much. The next turning point of the story is when the baby is stolen, and this is done by the witches, who are of course female. Does this mean the story is about how females quite literally eat their young, using their power and authority to undermine the younger generation of women in an attempt to extend their sexual longevity? No, that's Sleeping Beauty. To understand this, let's keep looking at the turning points in the story. The little boy gets seduced by the witch and poisoned by her kissing him, and apparently like regurgitating an apple down his throat or something. If only there was some kind of incredibly well-known allegory involving religion, apples, women, and men. Apparently, I don't give a damn, because though I am on the eve of figuring it out, Eden taking a walk through my garden, I can't quite place it. Alright, so next Anya's parents, instigated by her mother, turn on her and blame her for their children's deaths. Their extreme religious beliefs cause them to view Anya as a witch and worshipping the devil, despite the fact that she is actually a completely normal, nice daughter who is trying to do her best to do good in the world. Their betrayal of her causes her to turn to the devil and the witch coven, as she has been rejected by every other aspect of society, from the colony to her own family. So I was being a bit tongue-in-cheek earlier, but this movie is very clearly a critique and scathing criticism of both religion and anti-Christian sentiments. William's religious extremism gets his family exiled from the colony, and then causes his worldview to be so distorted, he turns on and imprisons his own daughter. Being so incredibly devoted to something has caused this to become an inflexible part of his worldview. And so instead of taking the evidence presented to him and altering his worldview to fit it, he is altering all of the incoming evidence to fit his worldview. In this case, he blames the devil and Satan for everything that is happening to him, namely his two sons being killed. Ironically, it is actually Lucifer doing it, and so he is actually kind of right, but he is completely wrong about Anya. His persecution of her is what causes her to turn to the devil, as his decisions left her essentially no choice. So why is this in conflict with the patriarchal interpretation of the story? Can't there be elements of both? Yes, of course there can be elements of both. However, I think it is very clear that William's religion is the primary driving force behind his decisions and the fundamental crux of his worldview. His perception of women is very negative due to the Garden of Eden, alluded to masterfully by the apple vomiting scene. He views women as having corrupted the otherwise happy and perfect world humanity used to live in, seeing their slutty harlotry as literally destroying paradise. Eggers provides a mountain of evidence suggesting women have their part in the creation of this hellish nightmare, considering the coven of all female witches are the ones who literally eat babies, which last I checked is frowned upon. They use their sexuality to lure in the young boy and then poison him, resulting in his slow, painful death. Anya's mother is the one who turns on her and sparks the fire of betrayal, which William is more than happy to join. And finally, Anya herself becomes seduced by the devil's promise of carnal pleasures and, butter, showing that even the most innocent and best intentioned among us can become corrupted by basic household dairy products under the right circumstances, and join a baby-eating, devil-worshipping cult. The anti-Christian sentiment is pretty obvious, I think, since the characters representing that viewpoint are literal devil worshippers and baby killers, and I really feel like that's not a very nice thing to do. If you want to view this movie as the male patriarchy is so bad it caused these poor victimized women to eat babies as your interpretation of this film, I guess that's up to you, but it is absolutely missing the more fundamental point, which is incredibly well supported by the actual evidence of the film. Extreme religious views corrupt people's perception of the world, and they start to see what they want to see.
Dost thou see a book before thee?
More specifically, seeing the devil everywhere, even in their own children. These extreme religious views act as the catalyst for a counterculture movement, paradoxically causing the youth of society to perform the actions and join the groups their overly restrictive parents are so worried about them joining. Some people may even see the ending as William being right all along, and we can argue chicken and the egg forever, but it seems clear without the actions of William and Catherine, Anya would not have joined the witch coven. Overall, art is often intentionally ambiguous, and there is no one singular interpretation of any individual piece of art that is the absolute correct one. If you are going to provide an interpretation, however, it should be supported by evidence within the piece of art itself. No one can remove their personal biases completely, but acknowledging those biases is the first step in starting to ameliorate their effects on warping your perception of the world. Sometimes you have to listen to a cannibalistic psychiatrist to help remind you of this fact.
Read Marcus Aurelius. Of each particular thing, ask, what is it in itself? What is its nature?
Advice I think many people in the world would do well to consider. Finding an article online does not confirm your quote-unquote research, and the bad things in your life are not always your children's fault, or the devil's. Sometimes it is the devil, but radical extremist views may actually provide fuel for the fire, and your desire to do good could become perverted and end up creating that which you dread most.